So here we are, the final theory tying together Up, Inside Out, Finding Nemo, Toy Story, and Ratatouille. This has been a long time coming, but I'm assuming you've seen the last couple videos. If not, I'll link the first and second thirds of this three-part mega theory for you to see now by simply clicking on the white rectangles in the top right corner. This was supposed to be one big, 50-minute theory, but I had to split it up into 3 videos across a couple weeks. They're not long, but it's taken so long to figure this out, and this is the end of it all. Wrapping it all up by answering 3 final questions and posing a timeline with accurate dates based off of this family tree. Hello, I've done it. Oh, have I ever done it. Easy? No, not by a long shot. Fun? Sure. Logical analysis and theoretical deduction is like the icing on the cake that is my channel. It's a 5-dimensional timeline, a pentagonal star of connections, each franchise connecting to the other with little timelines and interlocking data points. This video must be well organized, so first, here are 2 brief main questions that I think I can discuss possible answers to. Is there a significance in Grandpa Jerry being the toy cleaner who fixed up Woody, and why does Andy have his grandmother's postcard on his wall? Well, I think Jerry being a toy cleaner is no mistake, especially since he was brought in specifically to clean the very rare Woody doll. Perhaps the Woody doll means so much to Andy because Gary was the one in the toy business and already did have prior connections to this very specific doll, perhaps helping with the TV show. He knew just how to clean it, and he's a very professional, very genetically specific character. I do think this is a reference and a tie to the notion that the grandparental remarriages resulted in Andy getting the doll as a gift of some sort. As for the secondary question, I tried answering it back in my very first theory on Emma, in which I deduced that Andy, having the postcard, represented how he loves all of his grandparents, Emma, Carl, and the steps, Ellie and Derry. He loves how they all interconnect and love one another, how it could show a positive future for his allegedly divorced parents. Yes, divorced, because in 2018 I made a video where I solved his dad deeper. If you remember, YouTubers the Super Carlin brothers interviewed a friend of one of Toy Story's creators who passed away, and the friend claimed that the creator had implemented a whole story about Andy's dad being in framed photos and dying and all this stuff, which Andrew Stanton, another creator, then sarcastically debunked on Twitter. I spent over 10 minutes analyzing his single tweet and came to the insane conclusion that this entire story was simply a headcanon of the deceased writer, and thus its canonicity was too fickle to theorize on, effectively nullifying it from future theories. With all this in mind, the postcard, which is seen in some bonus content, I'm not even sure it's in Toy Story 3, is probably something personal to Andy, something in the vein of how his entire life is based around toys from one grandparent, exploration from another, love from yet another, and the massive interconnections sewn throughout. So Andy's intrigued by the theories too, might as well finally do this timeline. But I warn you, the complexity is striking. It's horrific. I am literally merging my Finding Nemo timeline with my Ratatouille timeline and trying to deposit integral events in there to prove everything in the most official way possible, alongside all of the other 3 timelines I tried to make with Up, Inside Out, and Toy Story. So here it is. I have all of the gaps between events right here from part 2, and I know very well how long each gap is. They are consistent, it's the dates that squirm. In part 2, I just threw up random numbers and reveals, but now I've had the time to connect more perfectly. Previously, I've just given year ranges, but in the name of specificity, I'm trying harder here. The most painstakingly accurate date you'll remember is Finding Nemo's 2003 time period. To connect these 3 timelines, we need to know how this fits in with the rest. Up and Inside Out's years are presumed unavailable unless they're super hidden or from an external source. Toy Story's years are irrelevant here, and Finding Nemo is our base, so I figured out the damn thing. You see, Inside Out shifts across this timeline and sort of drags Ratatouille and Finding Nemo with it wherever it goes, because the technology of BNL makes its dates extremely fickle. Based on the Aquascum 2003 Finding Nemo date, Finding Dory then is 2004, meaning Riley, who's about 1 year older here in Morro Bay, proves that Inside Out takes place in 2003 as well. In Riley's toddler flashback, the magazine with Colette is seen. This flashback is calculated then to take place in 1994, meaning Riley was born in 1991. If this magazine is 1 year after Linguini and Colette established their new restaurant, then it would mean Ratatouille is set in the early 90s. So I worked with this, and again, the technology is too fickle to use as evidence. Cell phones and computers are advanced in the Pixar multiverse due to the company known as BNL, such as how films like The Incredibles, which takes place in like the 50s or 60s, have insanely advanced tech too. Pixar backed themselves into a pit of plot holes and created an AI company to answer the futurism. But before I do one final summary of the enormous timeline, there is one irrefutable problem. I had just used Finding Nemo's date to prove all of the movie's years. I flew with the assumption that Jen and Jill both had their kids around the same time, and ergo proved Up, Inside Out, and Toy Story's years, all good. I spent hours on it, but then clarified on Twitter with fans, asking for them to debunk this idea of a 1994 Ratatouille setting. Adara the Shallot told me to check for dates, Seamus Gorman mentioned the technology thing, and many others told me to scan the film in general. I had planned to observe Renatta's letter to Skinner more closely, and finally did it much to my regret, because next to the letter, in Gusteau's will, it confirmed my greatest fear. I think the will says it was written in 2001, so but it doesn't disconfirm everything. All it means is that Colette being on this magazine is not due to her and Linguini setting up shop. It's probably something else, for being a famous female chef or a competition one or Gusteau-related stuff, but it is something. It just happened when she was much younger, prior to the film's occurrence date of the mid-2000s. But then, while writing this, I had an ultimatum aha moment like Remy from the film. I was watching Remy read the letters, and I saw that Gusteau's will offers up his restaurant to any living relative within 2 years of his death. Meaning if this does say 2001, then Ratatouille as well takes place in 2003? What the hell? This is getting horrifyingly weird! Pixar now has 3 films that are set in 2003. What kind of mystery have I stumbled upon? What are they doing? Willingly pointing to 2003 in no convoluted way? I'm not sure, but this long video needs to be compressed, so reshifting the timeline, we're back in business, baby. Here we go. A final run through, 5 films, 3 timelines intersecting, color-coded for my video series. Most logical, definitely explainable in every direction. Debunk it, I'll just make a bonus video circumnavigating the debunction. Let's go. So it starts in the year 1895 with the establishment of a dentist's office in Sydney, Australia. A man named Mr. Sherman runs it and eventually passes it down to his son, Sherman Jr. In the years that follow, Sherman Jr. passes the business down to his son, Sherman III. Meanwhile, in America, 4 children are born, all within the central US. We have the adventurous quartet of Carl Fredricksen, Emma Jean, Elizabeth Jean, and Jerry Linguini. This is assuming the likelihood that Ellie and Emma could be sisters, what with the similar everything, including names. Imagine if Carl and Jerry are brothers too, but, no. All born around 1930, they grow up seeking adventure and meet each other throughout the years, while Carl and Ellie bond significantly as best friends. As all of this goes on, 1943 rolls around, and over in France, we have a large, jolly man known as Mr. Gusteau, who marries a woman named Mabel. They have 2 boys together, known as Anton Gusteau and Augusta Gusteau. Mabel loves cooking, and her husband loves eating. Back in Australia, it's now 1947, and Sherman III's son is getting ready to accept the business as his own. He and his wife now have 2 boys, Philip and an unnamed man who has an interest in music. As they age in Australia and the Gusteau boys age in France, both sets of children are raised in extremely cultured homes, with the French studying the arts of criticism and culinary skill, and the Australians reveling in nature and marine life, as well as music and their inheritance of dentistry. The cultured brothers across the world age, while Carl Fredricksen starts to get a crush on one of his pals, but not his best friend, rather her sister. They end up getting married at a very young age, at age 20 or younger. They have 2 daughters, Jillian and Jennifer. The year is 1950, and these young parents aren't ready. They need instant assistance with these children. They don't get so much as 5 years in as quality parents before they need to fix this system, so they consult Elizabeth Fredricksen and Jerry Linguini. Who better to raise these children than Carl's best friend and Emma's? So this group of friends devises a plan where Carl and Emma divorce, but they remarry to tie the whole group together legally, so these adventurous parents can sustain such a life. Emma and Jerry get remarried promptly, and perhaps on their honeymoon or some other trip immediately surrounding the wedding. Emma, still a Jean, sends them a postcard wishing Carl and Ellie could come, but they cannot. They have a wedding to prepare for. Very unprepared people here. Carl's side of the wedding is quiet and depressed, hints that his mother may have recently passed away, while Ellie's side is cheering and screaming with the possibility of Emma and Jerry being there if not vacationing still. On these vacations, the couple instantly decides to have kids, and they end up giving birth to 2 more daughters around 1955 when all this goes down. Both are born with Ellie and Emma's signature red hair and green eyes. They name one Renata Linguini, and the other, well, we don't know. Unnamed Linguini. This is the single most mysterious and detached part of the whole tree. I nicknamed her Missy, short for, well, the fact that we know she's a future Mrs., and it makes more sense than to call her by another name she won't have until the confusing adulthood, so it's still 1955, but Carl and Ellie cannot conceive kids, so they continue to raise the 4 daughters they now have with their 2 best friends, while Emma and Jerry travel and explore to their heart's content. Back in France, the 2 chef boys have grown up in an extremely culinary environment, and Augusta shows brilliant signs of becoming one of the best cooks in France. Anton loves food like his fat father, but if he doesn't like it, he will not swallow it. This is most likely because he grows traumatized after his obese father dies suddenly around 1963, leaving the family instantly fractured and estranged. Anton completely delves into culinary criticism, which he is ruthlessly excellent at, and Augusta passionately takes over France's restaurant division like his mom had always wanted. This leaves Anton jealous from his lack of cooking ability, and he adopts the stage name Anton Ego to represent the way he sees everyone he once loved. He travels to England for his work and leaves behind the world he now despises so much, which breaks his mother's heart, sending Mabel into a spiraling madness that only grows in the years that follow. As this all happens, the Australian brothers are having a much better time with their arts. Let's call the unnamed brother Mitty, as we know he's a mister, and it'll fit with his spouse in the end, we'll see. So Mitty has a hobby for music and pianism, while the older brother, Philip, is granted a job he willingly loves, the family's old dentistry business. He goes to school to become a dentist, loves it, but still wishes for a life of marine biology and naturalism, which Mitty has found a job in. In fact, in 1972, he travels to California's Marine Life Institute to study the growing trend of fish intelligence. Now it's time for the most ambitious crossover in shitstory. Things are getting good. It's 1978, and Renata travels to France with her parents, where she immediately falls for the up-and-comer Auguste Gusteau. He now has a small team in a restaurant he's opening, and Renata stays with him while Emma and Jerry travel back home to America. Anton Ego has become a prominent food critic in England, and Renata likely despises him for his actions toward the family she is now integrated with. The reason Missy wasn't here on this vacation is because she stayed back at the Linguini's new home in California, where she met the new Australian guy, Mitty. They fall in love in quite the same way Renata and Gusteau do. These lustful redheads have the passion of their parents, and they dive headfirst into relationships with the worldly brothers. In 1983, Renata has a French son, Alfredo Linguini, but refuses to reveal that Gusteau is his father. She doesn't tell anyone. She doesn't even tell Gusteau himself. she refuses to disrupt his very important culinary work or introduce Linguini into that lifestyle at this time. Gusteau's very stressed, you see. Linguini has Gary's nose and all of Imogene's genes, so it's not a stretch to say he isn't Gusteau's, and she returns to America, granting him with his American accent. He is raised by the family of adventure, which Carl and Ellie are more than happy to aid with, as their frequent accidents prevent them from vacationing, so there's not much fun to have anywhere else. Oh boy, we're done the first half of the timeline, now let's get into the stuff actually seen in the movies. As all of this has been going down throughout the 50s, 60s, and 70s, the original two daughters of Emma and Carl have grown into women who are quite independent from the rest of their family for the most part. Gillian Fredrickson stays in the central US, but Jennifer finds a man in California and moves there to birth Andy Davis in 1987. A boy as wondrous and creative as his many, many grandparents, one of which gives Andy a doll from his world of toys. Gillian meets a man named William Anderson, and they have a daughter named Riley in 1991. Bill over here likely works for BNL, a massive futuristic conglomeration of sub-companies that has been accelerating the world's technology for years now. The family sends out recurrent photographs to all members, such as Ellie's now elder appearance being in young Riley's home. By the time 1995 rolls around, Andy has his birthday, and we finally see a film happen, that film being Toy Story 1. Missy and Mitty move back to Australia, and the problem child Darla Sherman is born, amplified by the near instant divorce those two go through for reasons pertaining to general nastiness. Mitty moves back to California, but Philip keeps an eye on Darla for his brother, who meets with her once a year because Missy stays in Australia with Darla, essentially swapping life locations with her husband. Things are looking up, but then 2001 rolls around and hits the fan when Renata gets sick. She returns to France with a now adult Alfredo Linguini and devises a plan to give her son a future. You see, Anton Ego has returned from England and has been successfully slamming dish after dish and book after book, all created by the brother he despises, which has ultimately subtracted one of Gusteau's cherished stars. Gusteau slips into a depression because of his brother, and Renata prepares a letter should something go wrong. Unfortunately, something definitely does go wrong, and she dies of illness right on the night Ego personally returns to Gusteau's restaurant to ruin his brother's career once and for all. Gusteau is crushed by his brother, and then the news of Renata hits him like a freight train, and, presumably like his obese father, Gusteau dies of hyper-stress induced by heartbreak from the two people he loved most in the world. Mabel Gusteau immediately loses it and descends into madness as she watches reruns upon reruns of her son, buying all of his books, trying desperately to retain the memory of him. Anton Ego has descended even deeper into his tragedy, now seemingly irreparably damaged from the depression he caused. Damn, that sucks. Motherly estrangement is seen as the movie Ratatouille begins. In the year 2003, 3 movies occur simultaneously, Finding Nemo, Inside Out, and Ratatouille. The accumulations of these massive problems explode, but Linguini learns of Gusteau and saves his uncle Ego from the void of depression, while Riley and her parents move to California for Bill's job. There, Jennifer has probably divorced her husband, but she has a new baby with similar genetics to Riley named Molly. The Sherman family's accumulation hits its peak in 2003. This is when Darla is completely traumatized on her 8th birthday when her uncle's fish launch an attack on her. Philip, now completely convinced of this rise in marine intelligence, moves his practice to California to be with his brother, where he shears sheep and owns animal life, as seen by his arm in the short film Bounden. Missy and Darla are left in Australia, but with nothing left for them there, they likely moved back to America, returning to Emma and Jerry. Toy Story 3 then occurs alongside Finding Dory in the year 2004, but during the next 5 years, Ellie Fredrickson gets quite ill and passes away, leaving Carl completely dead inside. Andy frames his grandma in memories on his wall, with things like postcards and the joys of his wonderfully complex family. Up occurs in 2009, and Carl has a nice new son figure by the end of it, having gone on more adventures than Emma ever could have in a lifetime. But finally, the question becomes, what happens next? Well, it's implied that Emma too has now died, leaving Gary as a denying old man desperate for love playing chess with a snarky Jean girl no longer around. A tragedy of a short film, a truly desperate depression. This takes a toll on Carl too, but he's lived his life and is ready to move on anyways, so he lives what's left with his new blimp and his amazing adventures. The other films have a somewhat happy ending too, and me, well, I move on too. To the next universe. We've solved the majority of this one. Let's now move through the multiverse interchange known as Monsters, Inc. and find a new universe to dive into. Perhaps one where AI has dominated like Wall-E or Cars, or maybe wherever The Incredibles is, I don't know. But this is far, far from over because Pixar is constantly updating their canon. I'll make a playlist filled with every single part of this massive 3-year Pixar connection theory if you want to see it again. I'll link it above now. Stay the hell tuned! Subscribe for sure, and next, I might look at more details in these same films. We've finished off the human connections of this universe, but the animals. Remy. Remember, I'm not done with him and Gusteau's ghost. There is more. Monsters, Inc. is a future timeline convergence that can hit back into the past like a multiversal interchange, and I will utilize this. Ring the bell, take my notifications. Until next time, which will be very, very soon. I'm most definitely the Theorizer.